Hi boys and girls, it's Mrs. Cutler here. I am with you to do Read Aloud this evening. We are in the book, the second book in the series, Among the Imposters, and we're on chapter 2 tonight. So we're going to get started with chapter 2. Here we go. Luke wanted to read the note from Mr. Talbot right away. He was sure it would tell him everything he needed to know to survive Hendrick's school for boys. No, to survive anything that might come his way in this new life, with outside hiding. It was just one thin strip of paper. Now it was in his pocket. Luke couldn't even feel it there, but he had faith. Jen's father had hidden Luke from the population police, double-crossing his own employer. He'd gotten Luke the fake ID so he could move about as freely as anyone else, anyone who wasn't an illegal third child. Jen's father had risked his life's career helping Luke. No, it was more than that. He'd risk his life. Surely Mr. Talbot would have written something incredibly wise. Luke slid his hand into his pocket, his fingertips touching the top of the note. Miss Hawkins was looking away. Maybe. The door opened behind Luke. Luke jerked his hand out of his pocket. "Scared you, didn't I?" the boy jeered. "Ha ha! Made you jump!" Luke was used to being teased. He had older brothers, after all, but Matthew and Mark's teasing never sounded quite so mean. Still, Luke knew he had to answer. "Sure, I'm jumpy like a cat," Luke started to say. It was an expression of his mother's. Being cat jumpy was good, like being quick on his feet. Just in time, Luke remembered he couldn't mention cats. Cats were illegal too, outlawed because they might take food that was supposed to go to starving humans. Back home, Luke had seen wild cats a few times stalking the countryside. Dad had liked having them around because they ate rats and mice that might eat his grain. But if Luke were really Lee Grant, filthy rich city boy, he wouldn't know a thing about cats, jumpy or otherwise. He clamped his mouth shut, closing off his shirt in a wimpy hiss. He kept his head down, too scared to look at the other boy right in the eye. The boy laughed cruelly. He looked past Luke to Miss Hawkins. "Ha ha! What's wrong with him?" the boy asked, as if Luke weren't even there. "Can't talk or something?" Luke wanted Miss Hawkins to stick up for him, to say, "Oh, he's just new. Don't you remember what that's like?" But she wasn't even paying attention. She frowned at the boy. "Raleigh, take him to the room 56. That's an empty bed in there. Just put his suitcase down. Don't waste time unpacking. Then take him back to Mr. Dirk's history class with you. He's already behind. Lord knows what his parents were thinking." Raleigh shrugged and turned around. "I did not dismiss you," Miss Hawkins shrieked. "May I be dismissed?" Raleigh asked mockingly. "That's better," Miss Hawkins said. "Now get on with you." Luke picked up his suitcase and followed, hoping Raleigh's request for dismissal would work for both of them. Either it did, or Miss Hawkins didn't care. In the hallway, Raleigh took big steps. He was a good head taller than Luke, and he had longer legs. It was all Luke could do to keep up, what with a suitcase banging against his ankles. Raleigh looked back over his shoulder, and he started walking faster. He raced up a long stairway. By the time Luke reached the top, Raleigh was nowhere in sight. Boo! Raleigh leapt out from behind a newel post. Luke jumped so high he lost his balance and he teetered on the edge of the stairs. Raleigh reached out and Luke thought, "Oh, he's not so bad. He's going to catch me." But instead, Raleigh pushed. Sorry, I lost my place. Instead, Raleigh pushed. Luke fell backwards. He might have tumbled down all the steps, except that Raleigh's push was crooked, and Luke landed on the railing. Pain shot through his back. Raleigh laughed. "Ha ha ha! Got you good, didn't I?" he said. Then, strangely, he grabbed Luke's bag, and he took off down the hall. Luke was afraid he was stealing it. He galloped after Raleigh. Raleigh screamed with laughter manically. That was not what Luke had expected. Raleigh dodged around the corner and Luke followed him. Raleigh discovered a secret about Luke's bag that Luke had missed. It was on wheels, so Raleigh could run at full speed with the bag rolling behind him. He careened his way this way and that, with the bag zigzagging from side to side. Luke got close enough to tackle him if he wanted, but he hesitated. If the bag had been full of his own clothes, all those hand-me-down jeans and flannel shirts that he'd gotten after Matthew and Mark had outgrown them, he would have leapt. But the bag with barren clothes, stiff shirts, and shiny pants that were supposed to make him look like Lee Grant instead of Luke Garner. He couldn't risk ruining them. He focused on Raleigh instead. Instinctively, Luke dove over the bag to catch Raleigh's legs. It was like playing football. Raleigh fell to the ground with a crash. "Just what's the meaning of this?" a man's voice boomed above them. Raleigh was instantly on his feet. He attacked me, sir," Raleigh said. I was showing this new boy to his room and he attacked me." Luke opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. He'd learned that from Matthew and Mark. Don't tattle. The man looked dismissively from Raleigh to Luke. "What's your name, young man?" Luke froze. He had to stop himself from saying his real name automatically. Then he had a split second of fearing he wouldn't be able to remember the new name that he was supposed to use. Was he taking too long? The man's glare intensified. Lee Grant," Luke finally stammered. "Well, Mr. Grant," the man snapped, "this is a fine way to begin your academic career here at Hendricks. You and Mr. Sturgeon have 2 demerits for this disgraceful display. You may report to my room after the final bell to do your time." But sir, I told you," Raleigh protested. "He attacked me." "Very well, Mr. Sturgeon. Make that 3 demerits for each of you." But, Raleigh was undeterred. 4. Raleigh was going to complain again. Luke could tell by the way he was standing, but the man turned away and began walking down the hall, as if Raleigh and Luke were both too unimportant to bother with, and he'd wasted enough time already. Luke's head swam with questions. What were demerits? When was final bell? And where was this man's room? Who was he anyway? Luke tried to muster up the nerve to call after the man or to ask Raleigh, which seemed even more dangerous. But then he was blindsided by a shove that sent him crashing into the wall. "Fonro!" Raleigh exploded. Luke slumped against the wall. His shoulder throbbed. Why did Raleigh seem to hate him so much? "Well, come on, you little ex-nay," Raleigh taunted. "Want to get demerits from Mr. Dirk, too?" He stepped backwards, tugging on Luke's suitcase. Then he shoved it through a nearby doorway. Luke looked up and he saw 156 etched on a copper plaque on the door. Relief overwhelmed him. Finally, something made sense. This was his room. The rest of the day would be horrible. He'd already resigned himself to that, but eventually it would be night and he'd be sent to bed. And he could come to his room and shut the door. And then he could read that note from Jen's dad if he didn't get a chance to read it before bedtime. Come nightfall, he'd know everything and he'd be safe, alone in his room. Imagining that haven that awaited him, in only a matter of hours, he got brave enough to peek around the corner. The room had 8 beds. 7 of them were made up with rich blue spreads stretched tautly from top to bottom. Only one, a lower bunk, was covered just in sheets. Luke felt as desolate as that bed looked. He knew it was his, and he knew he wouldn't get to be alone in this room. He probably wouldn't be safe either, not if any of his 7 roommates were anything like Raleigh. He edged his hand into his pocket, his fingers brushing the note from Jen's dad. What if he just pulled it out and read it now, right in front of Raleigh? He didn't dare. The way the last 10 minutes had gone, Raleigh would probably rip the note in shreds before Luke had even completely gotten it out of his pocket. and Jen's dad had acted like it was secret. If Miss Hawkins wasn't supposed to see it, there was no way Raleigh could be trusted. Raleigh hit Luke on the shoulder. "Tag, you're it!" he hollered, and he took off running. Panicked, Luke chased after him. Chapter 2. Wow, this Raleigh guy doesn't sound very nice, does he? I hope the other kids at this school treat Luke a little bit better than this Raleigh kid. Anyway, we're on Chapter 3. We'll read that tomorrow. And I will see you next time. Bye.